Okay. So again, welcome to everybody. I am just to introduce myself. I am Maruška Mileta. I work for Zelena akcija, or Friends of the Earth Croatia, which is the organizer of this event. My main topic of work is gas, especially LNG, so liquefied natural or fossil gas, as we call it, and also communications, so a mix of topics. And I'm happy to introduce to you, like I said, our amazing panel of people. So we have Frida here from Food and Water Action Europe, based in Brussels in Belgium. Welcome. We have Jenny from the Plexus Campaign for the Environment, Neville from the Green Connection from South Africa, and the Don't Gas Africa campaign. And Daniel from Friends of the Earth Mozambique. And you'll be hearing more about them and their amazing work in a short time. Just to give a brief introduction to our topic today and why we have decided to organize this event. So as you saw in the announcement, the focus is on the Croatian LNG terminal on Kirk Island, which was built and is operational already since 2021. And it has been fully financed by public money from the EU and from the Croatia state budget. And now, since last year, the Croatian government, jointly with the Austrian and also Bavarian, they want to expand the terminal by 100%. And again, to be financed by public money. It has been, I have to say, really difficult to talk about the topic of gas, and especially LNG in the last 2 years due to the energy crisis. And especially here in Europe and Eastern Europe, I would say more specifically. LNG has been sold by the Croatian government to public as a savior, kind of, in the energy crisis, and the government has been subsidizing, which is, I mean, a necessary social measure to subsidize citizens' energy bills. But in the long run, it's not really sustainable because it's still subsidizing fossil fuels and gas especially. But the very little focus, or I think there is no focus when we talk about LNG here, on where the gas is actually coming from, where it is extracted, and how it affects local communities from the countries that Croatia imports LNG from. I would say it's not a topic at all in Croatia. And in general, resource extraction in other parts of the world, and how it affects people. But as Friends of the Earth Croatia, we have been talking about these connections for a while, and not just how it impacts the climate, but also how it impacts people's health and human rights. The question, of course, LNG is very geopolitical topic, and here in Croatia as well, and energy security, that's kind of the main arguments that you can hear from our government. And this is something that if we talk about, if we try maybe to debunk, it's not something that we will really reach the public with. And I think more the question of humanity and how it affects people is something it's something better, I think, to focus on when we try to talk to the wider public. And this is something, we want to talk about today. In general, how our Croatian also addiction to gas and Croatian import of LNG is impacting specifically communities in the US and where Croatia, as in general, EU imports LNG mostly from, but also other parts of the world and other countries like Mozambique, where we also import LNG from. So this is why we have our great panelists today. Now, yeah, we'd like to hear more from them. So firstly, Frida, welcome. And can you tell us briefly about yourself?
Yes, sure. Hi, my name is Frida Kieninger. I'm based in Brussels, working for Food&Water Action Europe. We are a European program of Food&Water Watch, who are, among other things, fighting for a ban on fracking in the United States. And the European office was founded in order to also fight the threat of fracking coming to Europe back in 2012. And I've since focused on gas infrastructure, hydrogen, gas in general, and other fuel solutions. But now we really see that fracking is coming back directly to Europe in the form of LNG. So yeah, this is how the threat cycle is basically being closing. We work with the EU decision makers. We work with a network of gas campaigners, mainly from Europe, the Beyond Gas network. And yeah, happy to be here tonight.
Thank you, Frida. So my first question to you is, so a big part of EU's energy narrative since 2014 and Russia's annexation of Crimea has been to diversify EU's gas supply routes due to energy security. So what have we seen since then, and have we really decreased our dependence on Russian gas, in your opinion? And in general, as you focus a lot on the European wide work.
Yeah, indeed. Thank you for adding that. We work a lot on the European level and also with EU decision makers. Yeah, concerning diversification, this has been quite a big topic even before 2014. So there have been issues with paying off the bills, or there were like cut-offs or threat to cut off Russian gas due to Russian-Ukrainian tensions, for example, in 2006 and 2009. So this has been around as a basically a threat and a reason for EU decision makers and governments as well to talk about diversification of gas. I'm following particularly these infrastructure discussions, and there has been this requirement that each EU country has to have access to at least 3 different sources of gas. LNG was just meant as one source of gas, even though theoretically through an LNG terminal you could get gas from all across the world. So this was already used as a reason to build and interconnect a lot of the EU countries, but also with other countries. And of course, then since the invasion of Ukraine in 2022, this whole discussion really accelerated, and we saw in only a few months like 8 large-scale new LNG import terminals popping up on the shores of Europe. We saw a lot of infrastructure, of course, as well. Popping up everywhere. Indeed, there has been a huge shift with the fact that Russian gas became basically toxic, and people got aware as well of the fact that we are funding the war by buying the Russian gas. In the years before 2022, Europe relied to around 40% on Russian LNG. That's 155 billion cubic meters. That's quite a lot. And now, indeed, and getting back to your question, whether this has decreased, yes, it has decreased quite substantially. So Russian pipeline gas has decreased from the 40% to around 8% now. So that's also something that EU institutions are praising themselves for. On the other hand, there is there is the issue of Russian gas imported in the form of LNG, which is rising. So Russian LNG imports have really been on the rise. That's quite an issue, for example, in Spain, but also in Belgium, where we have an LNG terminal, the Zeebrugge LNG terminal, which is basically specializing in transshipments. That means you have one tanker carrying Russian LNG, which then is connecting to another tanker and loading, so to say, the LNG onto another tanker, which is basically a clean washing or a Russian flag washing, to be able to say that this LNG is not coming from Russia. So we saw that in Zeebrugge there has even been a part of the terminal being expanded just for these transactions. In terms of the dependence on who is actually still using a lot of Russian gas, it's actually mainly concentrated on a few countries. Hungary, which is probably not so surprising, Slovakia, also Austria, where we know there have been contracts made with the Russian Gazprom. So it's the Austrian oil and gas mayor says that they cannot get off the contracts, while a lot of the contracts in other countries have been broken. So the question is a lot about the will as well to get off Russian gas. And also the Czech Republic has still some share. So I think this is a bit touching on this first cluster of questions.
Mm-hmm. Thank you, Frida. Yeah, we can go maybe in the discussion later more about like actually do we know what the gas that we are getting is, where is it from? Like sometimes maybe we don't know that it is coming from Russia, but it is through some other pipelines. So we can maybe talk about that a bit later. Jenny, next to you, can you tell us in a few sentences who you are and what you do?
Yeah, so my name is Jenny Espino. I've been a community organizer based in Texas. I'm currently, born and raised and based in Corpus Christi, Texas, which is along the Gulf Coast. I've been a community organizer for a little over 15 years. I am the communications coordinator for Texas Campaign for the Environment. We organize around and against petrochemicals, around issues around water quality and water access. Specifically right now, waging a really heavy campaign against the pursuit of desalination in our region of 5 proposed desalination plants, which would only benefit polluting industries and only harm our bay. And then our other main focus is like cumulative health impacts of the various industries here, one of those being Cheniere, which is an LNG facility.
Thank you. Yeah, and we'll get into that more deeply in today's event. So as I said earlier, so the US is now the biggest LNG importer to the EU, including countries like Croatia. But we rarely talk about like I said, the local impacts of these industries in the US. And the impact that our gas addiction has on the communities. So could you tell us which US states and areas export most LNG to the EU? And how do these companies operate locally? Are there any also other industries that are concentrated at the same place?
Yeah, so I think I'll start by kind of talking about how these industries operate locally. One of the big things for us is the number of tax breaks they are receiving. So in Cheniere's case, they have received over $1.2 billion in tax breaks, which comes out to about $4 million per job. Cheniere received another $150 million last year through what was formerly called a 313 agreement, which is an agreement made with our school district. And so that $150 million was in exchange for only 30 jobs promised. Who knows what that will end up, which is $5 million per job, which comes out to over $150,000 per child. In the region that Cheniere is in, which is called Gregory, there's been an enormous population decline in organizing and canvassing in that region. Parents are talking about the number of respiratory issues that their children are experiencing, needing to keep them home from school because of how severe the health problems are among children especially, but certainly among that whole population there. I don't need to likely go into a lot of the health impacts with regard to cancer rates in these regions, but a lot of these things are overlooked in terms of other respiratory issues and asthma rates, especially among kids. Given Cheniere's proximity to 5 different public schools. And so, in addition to all of that, I think it's important to like make clear that our Environmental Protection Agency, which has huge limitations, is even within those limitations has designated Cheniere as a major polluter. And so it's not just the case that like Cheniere is another bad actor and bad neighbor. They're among the worst. And so that's dictated under federal law because it emits more than 250 tons of pollution. And so like this is considering the limited and lackluster regulations that exist at a federal level, but it's even worse when you consider how many limits are left up to state regulators to determine, what this looks like, which is why our region has essentially been strategically chosen as a sacrifice zone. So if you look at where these LNG facilities are and where the new proposed ones are, for the most part, they are Texas, Louisiana, along the Gulf South, right? Because they know like this is a region that is not unionized, that does not prioritize like workers' safety, workers' health, certainly doesn't prioritize the health and safety of the people who live in our communities that are predominantly Black, Brown, and Indigenous. And so, if you extend that to look at the beginning of the frac cycle in the Permian Basin, that is also true there, right? That this is low income, working class, Black, Brown, and Indigenous communities. And so all of that is dire enough on its own when you look at it. But when you think about the cumulative impacts of the other industries that exist here, and put into perspective that our port, for instance, is the #1 exporter of crude oil in the country, the 3rd in the world, that we are also being overrun by petrochemicals. They are proposing ammonia and green and blue hydrogen and all sorts of other things that they are wanting to experiment in our communities with, on top of all of the industrial expansion and build out that is already being pushed in our region. The impacts are pretty severe.
Thank you, Jenny. We'll get more in those topics in a bit. Thank you for sharing. Daniel, welcome. Could you also tell us a bit about yourself, firstly?
Hi, I'm Daniel Ribeiro. I'm one of the founding members for Justiça Ambiental, Friends of the Earth Mozambique, and I've been active for over 25 years, so it's been a long time. And it started with a local cement factory to burn obsolete pesticides. We got together and managed to stop that, and then a whole lot of other people suffering other battles asked for help, and now we work with a lot of frontline communities on the ground against a lot of these big projects. And one of the biggest projects, actually the largest investment in Africa, is up north in Mozambique, with the gas fields up north in Mozambique. So that's what I'm focusing on right now. Thanks.
Thank you. So my first question to you, apart from the US being the biggest importer to Croatia of LNG, there are also other countries that we get gas from, like Nigeria, Qatar, Oman, Trinidad, Indonesia, and Mozambique. So could you give us an overview of the gas fields in Mozambique? Now you touched upon a bit, and which companies are operating there?
So Mozambique is actually starting its gas exploration. We're not much of a producer until recently. So up north, there's 2 areas, Area 1 and Area 4. Area 1 is run by Total, and we're talking about a capacity of 4.5 billion tons of CO2 equivalents. So it's quite a big reserve. It put us from not being on the map to being one of the 10 biggest gas exporters. It's a huge carbon bomb. The other one is Area 4, and that's run by Eni, the Italian company, and ExxonMobil, the US company. Both of these areas are in UN biosphere of global importance. It's a set of archipelago tropical islands, and in the areas of indigenous local communities. So more than 80%, actually, it's more than 90, but we just play it safe and say 80 because the data is still not very foggy. But yeah, most community are subsistence-based, fisher folks and farmers. So as you can imagine, the impact on them is severe.
Marushka, you're muted.
You're muted. Okay.
Thank you. Thank you for that. Yeah, I was saying welcome to Neville as well. And if you could also introduce yourself first. Neville?
Yeah, good day to you and good day to all the comrades. Let me just switch on my mic as well. Good day to you all. My name is Neville van Rooy. So I'm the community coordinator for the Green Connection, based in Cape Town, but working in the 4 coastal provinces of South Africa, doing a lot of oil and gas work and fighting a lot of these multinational companies. Big names such as Shell and Total, some of our irritations around here. And yeah, I'm the face of the organization, doing a lot of grassroots work with mostly fishers / overlapping sometimes indigenous communities or in the Western Cape, Northern Cape, Eastern Cape, and partnering with our partner organization, even in the KZN, all the way next to the border of Mozambique. So, but also part of DGA, Don't Guess Africa Alliance, that basically works and with a lot of civil society organizations all over the continent, from South Africa, where I am, the way down south. Yeah, so all the way up to communities, all up to Egypt and Tunisia up there. So yeah, and DGA is about 2 years running, and remarkably, notoriously, as you know, done remarkable work on an international scale. We know the importance of taking the African voice over to the the global north, and that's one of the key roles that DGA plays, also about taking the African voice and views over to that side, as well as coordinating all of these different organizations and countries, bringing them together, and sometimes do solidarity and strategic discussions to mobilize and to coin our views as organizations with similar views and struggles, and even sometimes fighting the very same multinational companies. So Don't Guess Africa gave birth out of that organizations that came together to voice out their struggles and challenges that they have on the continent. Yes, with a very strong Pan-African voice, taking also on various companies. So yeah, but back to my world, yeah, doing a lot of oil and gas. Thank you.
Thank you. No, you answered basically my first question about yeah, Don't Guess Africa, but we can get a bit into details then later of the concrete work. So coming back, but yeah, just to stress that we heard some of the same European companies like Total operating in different parts of Africa. So this is important to keep in mind. Yeah, coming back to Frida and continuing. Yeah, actually, maybe first to ask Jenny about it, and then I'll come back to you, Frida. recently, so actually it's very new. We had the US administration, so the Biden administration, announce that it will kind of pause new licenses for new LNG terminals that export LNG to the EU. Is there any impact on current projects, and how does it actually impact US projects and your work? Do you think this pause how long it will last, and could it actually turn into a permanent ban, let's say, on export of LNG?
Yeah, so I think like one of the things I think is important to be clear about is like, I'm not of the opinion that most change happens because of like the conscience of people in positions of power, or like the kindness and principles of the ruling class. So like, I think a lot of the conversation in our communities is that this is just like a political play because we're in an election year, which is fine. Not ideal, not great, but like I think most meaningful change is demanded and built from the bottom up and is a response to like the undeniable resistance that's being waged in our communities against LNG. And so, sure, it's a political decision that is a response to like our communities fighting back and saying, we don't want these facilities here. Please rethink whether or not this is actually in the public interest, which in our view, it is undeniably not, right? And so I think we're viewing this as an opportunity to kind of focus on a few things, like one of those being focusing on some of the fossil fuel finance organizing we're doing around the facilities that are proposed, and the other shedding light on a lot of the international work that you all are doing, because I think that's been one of the biggest arguments that we've faced. You know, our Secretary of Energy, Jennifer Granholm, came to Texas last year and told us all, you know, we have to keep our European allies warm and in the winters, and it is our responsibility to meet the needs of our allies. To which I would say, yeah, I do want to keep our European allies warm in the winter, and LNG is an incredibly unsafe and unreliable way to do that. We've experienced that in our own like historically cold winters. We've experienced incredibly erratic weather here, at which point the only thing that has saved us is renewables, right? We lost hundreds of people in a winter storm a couple of years ago. We've had unprecedentedly high temperatures in the summer, and you know, similar issues around our grid not holding up and the unreliability of fossil fuels. And so it gives us a chance to kind of reorient and focus on that. One of the biggest misconceptions about this pause is what it does. So for me, for instance, living in Corpus, where Cheniere already exists, where their plans for expansion have already been permitted and approved, it has no impact on what happens at Cheniere and their ability to function and pump out productivity, right? And that's true of all facilities that already exist and are under operation, that are under construction, or that have already been permitted, right? So all of this like fear mongering about people losing their jobs and the impact this will have on working class people and their jobs is really just fear mongering at this point, because all of those folks are still fully employed. All of those facilities are still fully under operation, right? And so I think that's the other thing that this pause enables us to do, is actually like sharpen what it would mean to actually win, what it could look like to actually win an end to LNG in our own communities, what that would mean for the workers in those facilities, and by extension, the workers who are, you know, putting themselves in danger with regard to like the beginning of the frac cycle. And for us, our focus is really eyes on the Permian Basin and what's going on there with workers, who are working there. And so I would say, those are the biggest things I have been trying to highlight to folks in talking about this pause, what it actually means, the limitations in terms of it not necessarily going far enough, obviously, but what it does give us the opportunity to do while we keep fighting for an actual meaningful end to LNG in our regions.
Thank you, Jenny. That's a very interesting input. I would say, I think in Europe, we also don't view this as, kind of we do, let's say, celebrate it. Kind of a way as a win for the climate movement. But as you say, it is actually in practice something different. But it is still something to be used as a to put more pressure on the Biden administration and the EU, but not just because of Europe, but because exactly how you say, how it impacts also situation in the US and communities. So continuing on Jenny's input, Frida, I would like to hear maybe from the European point of view on this halt of new US LNG export facilities, and how could it impact, or is it impacting EU projects like, for example, the Kirk LNG expansion, in your opinion?
Yeah, I think a lot of, especially the most important stuff has been said by Jenny and now by you as well. I think it's a twofold, it's two sides of a coin, basically. Indeed, it's really important to celebrate what has happened, and indeed, like, groups in the Gulf region have been fighting for so long. And then again, important to see that this is not permanent. We don't know for how long this halt will be. We don't know how the criteria to assess the terminals would be elaborated. And then again, it would only affect like around a bit under 20 projects. And that's something that you also said, Jenny. For people living this, it's clear there are human rights violations linked to that. There is huge environmental pollution. This is not in the public interest. So I understand as well that people who have an insight into what these projects do, it's a bit of a ridiculous question. But I nevertheless think that, particularly from the US, which has been a net importer of gas until very recently and is now like flooding the globe with LNG, it is important that finally there is this symbolic decision. Like, we at least stop for one moment to think, and we don't have this unslowed expansion. And we saw, particularly for Europe, as you asked about Europe as well, this is what we see in Europe with all these new infrastructure coming online, and having worked on gas infrastructure expansion before the war, it's very interesting and scary as well how fast it happened that LNG import capacity has been raising. And we saw in several countries specific laws, LNG acceleration laws, that would make it easier to even faster build out even more. So I think if there on this one side there is finally at least some kind of symbolic break being taken, this is definitely important and useful for us to really look at that. And we don't see some general look at the overall LNG capacity build out in Europe. We don't see this. We don't see the Commission or anybody really saying, what are we doing here? And we have still lots of very high build-out plans. They would result to LNG import capacity amounting to 400 billion cubic meters. That's more than Europe is consuming. And we know that we have very high import from pipelines already. So it's already, given starting from current European demand, it's already an overcapacity. And then we have had a demand drop in the last months as well. We are like 19%, gas demand has dropped by 19%, and we have to make this a structural and permanent continuous gas demand drop to a phase out. Anyway, anything else would be completely blowing the Paris Agreement and our climate targets. So all these things are not adding up. The LNG terminals in Europe were used at under 60% in 2023. The gas storage is as high as never before. We are probably going into the end of the winter season with very high storage. So this already shows as well that already the infrastructure we have now is far from being used fully. So yeah, the justifications of building even more here in Europe is simply not there. And I'm very grateful as well for the US and EU collaboration, because it also was not very clear for me before I talked to Jenny and others that actually Europe is being used as an excuse for this build out. And that's why it's important that we stand up and say we don't want to be your excuse for senseless build out and for building stranded asset after stranded asset, which is money and time and promises that should go into a just transition. So yeah. So I think this decision is definitely not as huge, but there is a lot that we can build on it from.
Yeah, thank you, Frida. And I'm glad you mentioned the demand side for Europe, especially as the Biden administration said that this will not impact EU's demand, and that actually what now is flowing is enough. So yeah, like you said, there is really no excuse, and especially like, for example, for the LNG expansion, one of the excuses is also, I mean, that Germany needs gas, but we hear also that from other EU countries like France, that they also need to build LNGs so they can import to Germany. I mean, Germany is building many also at LNG terminals. So the question is like, okay, how much gas does Germany need? So yeah, it's quite ridiculous, I would say. So coming back now to Danielle. So while we know that Mozambique contributes to global greenhouse gas emissions in minimal way, the country is actually one of the world's most vulnerable to climate change. So you already touched upon it a bit, but can you tell us how has the extraction of gas impacted your country and specifically local communities in the Cabo Delgado province, if you can talk about that more? And would you say there are also links to the armed conflicts there? If so, in what way?
Yeah, the impacts are so many. So as you can imagine, local communities are subsistence-based fisher folk and farmers. They've been moved away from the coastline. They lost access to the ocean and therefore one form of livelihood. Also, they're being given houses, but there's not enough land for everybody. So there's been loss of livelihoods around these issues. But in general, the region, a lot of these issues, when communities start mobilizing and raising the voice, the government has a heavy hand in controlling, because a lot of these projects are still under construction. Only one floating LNG, Coral South, has started. All the rest are still at the early phases. So they're quite worried. So unfortunately, this oppression and this marginalization has amplified social tensions. A lot of people focus on the conflict and the extremism, but the question we should be asking is, we've always had extremist narratives in East Africa, and in Mozambique, it's never had traction. Why is it having traction now? It's because we have marginalized local communities. We have taken away people's livelihoods, and then when people try to organize constructively to try and raise a voice and solve the problems that are facing them, they're oppressed heavily. And when you take away constructive pathways, you're always going to end up having these kind of outcomes. And that's the reality in many places as well, not only Mozambique. The other issue as well is that it's not so easy to say cause and effect. It's quite complex. But one thing is for sure, these projects amplify existing tendencies. So if you have a government that has an oppressive regime, that has corruption, and has what these big investments do is they amplify whatever existing tendencies, and therefore they've amplified the oppression, they've amplified the militarization, and they've given a resources in which has been used against the people on the ground. So yes, there's a definite link. Of course, the companies will say no, it's not, and there's no, but unfortunately, because these narratives are complex, it's easy just to disassociate yourself. But also it's in other ways as well, because of some of the social tensions. For example, Mozambique went on a illegal loaning spree, because the minute you have these contracts and you have these gas, you have projected revenues, and you can use the projected revenues to gain loans. So what happened is Mozambique did this illegally and went from, and our debt went from being around 40 to 50% of our GDP to 120 to 150% of our GDP. So debt increases, further causing economic crash and social tensions, increase of poverty, which feeds conflict. And then the government comes in with a huge militarization and a wave of kidnappings, abductions, rapes, and a whole bunch of human rights issues from 2017 till now, which further feeds the recruitment and the abuse and this blew up in 2021 on March when the insurgents attacked the area, the project area. We had over 1,200 community members died. We did surveys of 13,000 households. So we can give you a name, a person, and how they died, where they died, all accounted for and verified. So 1,200 community, well, 1,194 to be exact, and of which 305 were beheaded. That's how violent these attacks are. And nothing in the media, and Total put us for force majeure. Total now is claiming that it's safe to come back. But what they've done is they've increased militarization. We have Rwandan troops, SADC troops, EU support, and they haven't dealt with the drivers. So we can't deal with these type of conflicts without dealing with the drivers. And the sad thing is, as Mozambique government has done more of these atrocities, more of these violent acts, oppression of civil society, the European companies have improved their relationship because there's so much interest in these investments, because it's the biggest investment in Africa. And that causes a sense of impunity and reinforces the government. And our local elections, which are usually very peaceful, were fraught with violence, fraud, and a whole bunch of problems. And everybody just accepted it. So gas is kind of buying the silence of the international community and allowing this to even worsen. And this is just a tip of the iceberg. And to make things even worse, just to give a global context, gas is a stranded asset. And these companies know this. So what they're doing is they're making contracts with African countries like Mozambique. They are starting the gas that have huge clauses and guarantees that are linked to investor-state dispute settlements. So what happens is they're going to get their money either through extraction or through Mozambique compensating for the failure to extract due to environmental laws, climate action, or other facts. Mozambique right now is the country with the highest ISDS liability in the world of over $30 billion. So if that happens, it collapses us. And that's the reality of gas, because we're starting something everybody's trying to get transitioned to somewhere else. And that's the problem. And this is just a tip of the iceberg. We actually released a study yesterday on this issue around ISDS, which I can put the link to. And I'm sorry I'm speaking a bit fast. I apologize to translators. It really riles me up when I start speaking about it. Thanks.
Thanks a lot. It's a very complex and difficult topic, I think. And it's important that we are aware that our gas addiction in Europe is fueling conflicts and human rights violations in many parts of the world. And this is something that's really not talked about here at all. So I want to ask next Neville something. So Croatia has no direct links to South Africa when it comes to gas that we know of yet. But I'd like to know how the situation there is with gas. Does your country export or import LNG? And what are the local impacts on people and the environment there?
Yeah, thank you very much. We know that we have the government that has pronounced this problematic just transition of gas being part of the transition. So now because we have power cuts, we suffer from power cuts almost to level 6, level 8, and then people are in the dark. People cannot even buy, mostly the marginalized communities cannot even buy food because you'd have unannounced cuts of your power, and then you would lose your food. So that is how it is affecting the most marginalized groups, and other people have other elite groups can easily buy solar and other means to bypass that, but other marginalized communities cannot. So the government came with this plan to get Turkish car power ships, and these power ships are um, uh, uh, ships that works with gas, and the LNG ship also will then come and fuel this gas. And this was highly a controversial matter all across South Africa, and we were part of fighting it. We still have a case where we were taking our electricity NERSA regulator to court because they wouldn't play open cards with us as to giving them an electricity generation license for these car power ships. So we were not happy about that. On top of that, the other concern was not just the LNG. These ships comes with unprecedented noise levels, and the fishing communities in one of the communities I work with in Saldanha. It was in Saldanha, in Kucha, and in Richards Bay, where 3 different provinces where they will put these ships. And these ships, came with a lot of noise, and fishing communities were up in arms about asking what are the noise levels that these ships comes with. We are very much concerned about this. And on top of it, we know that this area that you want to put these ships are a breeding zone for a particular species of fish that people enjoy. And those were the challenges that we also pointed out. And we also, when we research these power ships, they come with very high costs and very high prices. And, that was the other economic concern that people had about these ships. That is coming into our area. And those were very tensions all around the 3 provinces where these ships were. And then we fishing communities rallied around these provinces, and we challenged them in the sense that we wanted to know they did not even have a proper environmental impact assessment, because there was not even place where these ships was harbored in one province, which is Kucha. And they pointed out the space where these ships were going to be docked. And those were the complications. And when we had interactions as the Don't Gas Africa group, like we normally do with our compatriots from Ghana, they had the very same ships over there, and they complained that these ships were very noisy, and they could not deal with the cost of these ships. And the LNG, we know when we look at the document from these project, we just show that companies that are involved there, once again, is your Totals and your Shells, and that raises the alarm for us. But temporarily, now our government has made a announcement recently in early January that there is no space on the grid for car power ships, and that was a win for us. So we are happy that they are now having to start their processes all over again. So that is the issue when it comes to LNG. And let me also add, and maybe as one of the things, Daniel, was also that we were going to get our gas from Mozambique, was one of the places that we're going to get our LNG from. So those were one of the names that came up. And also, just for the sake of interest, we also saw Russia having military exercises in our waters over here, and that was a very big concern, that they were allowed to have those military exercises in our waters. And we were, many people were against that. And we know that South Africa has been a part, an alliance with Russia for a long time, and it's on those bases that our government has agreed for those military exercises. And we still think it will continue to go on. and we will have our eyes and ears on the ground to see if there will not be some gas maneuver or some sort of deals happening through that relationship that South Africa have with Russia. Let me just stop there for now.
Thank you for that input and making those connections with also Mozambique, and also we see a lot of the same patterns when it comes to impact on local communities. That, for example, in Europe, we do not really have these kind of impacts, I would say, especially not this heavy. I want to ask next, Jenny, you already talked about the impact that LNG and other industries have on the people along the coast of the Gulf of Mexico, the so-called sacrifice zone. And you yourself come from one of those communities. Could you tell us more about where you are from? How is the impact there? I can only imagine how the work is very difficult when you're also impacted by those industries.
Yeah, so I'm going to start with the stuff that I think is easiest to talk about. Yeah, I know that I've like harped on kind of talking points about like tax breaks a lot, but I hear it's huge, right? That like one of the biggest things that we come up against is this narrative around job creation, and that like people need jobs. It doesn't matter what those jobs are at the expense of, right? And so the average cost to like taxpayers in this region for just one promised job across like all of these various fossil fuel heavy polluting industries is $950,000 per job, which the workers clearly aren't making. So our city and council officials in Nueces County and San Patricio County, which is where all of the industrial build out in our region is, has given collective tax breaks worth over $700 million to these corporations. And so that flies in the face of all logic about what we actually know about who are the largest employers in our region, which are education and healthcare are the largest employers. So instead of investing in those fields, they are wildly underfunded. And instead of investing, in education and healthcare and things that help and heal, right? And instead of investing in other publicly funded services, or parks, or roads, recreation, literally anything, but some things that harm us, we're handing out these enormous breaks to industries that are harming our environment, our community, and our loved ones. And so, you know, all of these alleged jobs come at the expense of you know, the obvious, like our bay, our air quality, our land. And in addition to that, you know, come with all of these cumulative health impacts. And so if you look at a region in our city on the north side, like called Hillcrest, which is a historically Black neighborhood, that they have all but destroyed over the course of the past several decades. Our city was literally planned to build an interstate through so that they could build all of the industrial build out and all of the refineries on the north side of our city, which effectively segregated our city in terms of low income and working class folks from those with more wealth and who were historically whiter. And so this last historically Black neighborhood is literally sectioned off. We call it the cut in our city by an interstate. And so the life expectancy in that region is 17 years lower than the rest of our city. And so we know what those impacts have looked like historically. We've lost, so many people in our community and within our movement work. Last year, we lost Pastor Adam Carrington, who it was a leader in the faith community and in Hillcrest to cancer. We have a number of other people in our movement and in our communities who are fighting what these health impacts look like, you know, to us in the most real ways. A lot of that is understudied with regard to LNG because it is new. And the regulations are much less strong because it is new. We actually only really have regulations for the import of LNG, which do not help us at all. And so what that looks like in terms of actually measuring what the harm is of all of these is it means that corporations like Cheniere can effectively say, you cannot tell us that we are the ones who are having these impacts on the health of these communities, because look at the rest of what the rest of these industries are doing. You can't pinpoint and say that it's us. So it makes it very difficult to fight back because it's true. Like those health impacts existed long before Cheniere decided to set foot in our communities and wreak havoc. That like our communities were already effectively being slowly killed off by what these industries do to them. And so building a case with regard to what those health impacts look like and what those impacts are on our communities becomes really difficult because it is hard to kind of like zoom in on what the impacts of any single industry is doing, because all of them are working in concert to make our health what it is and to make our lives collectively much worse. And so we live with this grief of those that we've lost, but like moreover, what I think is like best described as an anticipated grief of like what will happen, what will continue to happen, like when our health and lives and environment aren't prioritized. And this extends beyond like what we understand about health impacts in terms of our air quality, which I feel like a lot of our focus is on, but it is also at the expense of our water. These industries use such an enormous amount of our water supply and are paying much, much less than we are paying for water. And so we are in a drought right now. And so it is also used to justify this push for desalination. Right now, there are 5 proposed desalination plants. The first draft permit that's been approved for a desalination plant is what's called the Inner Harbor Desalination Plant, and that is in Hillcrest, our last remaining historically Black neighborhood, who has already been fighting back against the industrial build out, against all of the other things that come with that. This push for a new and higher bridge that is built through their community, that has already been built through and alongside. And so I think it's really easy to like do 2 things. Like one is like zoom out on like the impact on climate and what this means in terms of climate change. And the other is to like be really myopic and zoom in on like specifically Cheniere or any pick your poison, right? That oftentimes things like the impact on water, the impact on land are not necessarily like thought about, like what this means in terms of all of these industries working in concert, and in terms of things like this push for more water for heavy polluters that doesn't actually benefit the people who live there, who are also experiencing incredibly huge issues with our water sources because of these industries. I'll pause there.
Thanks a lot, Jenny. And I'm sorry for this heavy question. I know it's very difficult, but I think it's very important that we hear this side of the story as well, because oftentimes from Europe, we just view the US as just exporter of LNG without actually knowing what's happening there on the ground to real people. So I think for us as campaigners and activists, it's very important to be aware that there is impacts also, let's say, like in the global north, very serious impacts on especially Black and brown communities. And yeah, so thank you so much for sharing that with us. And building on what you actually mentioned, water use. I think that's very important when you talk about gas extraction in the US, which is mainly done by fracking. So I wanted to ask Frida, as you are also campaigning for a fracking ban, and so let's call it fracking, has been banned in Croatia in 2021 and in many other EU countries before as well. But still, we have no problem to import LNG from, for example, the US, which has been produced predominantly by fracking. Could you tell us what are the proven impacts of fracking on people and the environment? And could fracking actually come back to Europe? And do you perhaps see any way to ban the import of fracked gas on EU or national levels? We've seen some movement, for example, in Ireland on that.
Yeah, I think the question of could fracking come back to Europe, it's like being imported day by day by day. And if we look at the vessels, it's precisely quite some ships coming directly from Corpus Christi, which is where Jenny is living, and also Sabine Pass and other export terminals. So there is really this direct link of really importing a fuel that is poisoning along the chain. Because if we see that how huge are these impacts on communities living next to export facilities, and this whole toxic cocktail of these export and port and petrochemical facilities. On top of that, there's also the issues of fracking itself, and we didn't even talk solely about that. So it's really I think this is often just too big for our brains to realize. What the gas, and really the simple thing that we are burning when we cook pasta, or that we're burning when we have a shower, and that industry is burning a lot of, is what is attached to this. In terms of fracking being back and being straight imported into Europe, we looked at the numbers and tried to calculate how much of the gas in that we are having running in pipelines and in our gas stove is fracked. In 2022, we found it's probably like 12%, as we know that a large majority of the gas that is extracted in the US is fracked. It said that it's close to 80%, and even more of that is the percentage of fracked gas in the exported LNG. This year we have not run the numbers because we don't have the full data yet, but it's likely that it's even more. And Croatia is a very special example because it's one of the top European fracked gas importers. If you look at the size of Kirk terminal and how much gas it imported, in comparison with how much gas demand is in the entire member state of Croatia, we calculated that 80% of the volumes of the entire yearly gas demand of Croatia is fracked gas. So this is huge, and nearly all the terminals in Europe are importing fracked gas. And it's interesting, it's a very hypocritical thing that particularly actually those countries that have a fracking ban, for example, Spain. But there are many countries, including Germany, who has a moratorium on fracking, is going big on importing fracked gas. So this is really this very egoistic and very hypocritical way of importing in big style a fuel that is with an extraction method that is forbidden or really really limited in their own country. And we have to say that Europe is barely extracting any gas anyway, so it's 90% of the gas is being imported. So there is already this not in my backyard issue going on. Yes,
could you say, continuing on, like, why is it actually banned? Like, why is it so harmful?
So it's actually a huge list. I mean, there are whole compendiums coming out of this, but it's really all along. There are issues of air pollution. There are issues of water pollution. Water is being contaminated. Basically, some people there is this famous thing of people that can actually light on fire the water coming out of the tap. Are so many different drilling operations. It's really basically making a Swiss cheese out of the geological formations, which often has led to you know, aquifers being contaminated, and this contamination being able to really invisibly go anywhere. And there are huge health issues of people that are living close to fracking operations with rashes and asthma and to like low birth weight of children, but really like very, very severe health impacts along the line, which of course I think it's similarly to what's happening in Corpus Christi and around. It's really always being claimed that this cannot be linked to the industry. I mean, it's also, it's not just a borehole and being, you know, that's the fracking method being that it's large amounts of water mixed with chemicals pumped underground, which, and these chemicals, they form, yeah, toxic cocktails where we don't even know what they do to people. They often make happen that radioactive materials come back from the ground. There are massive amounts of wastewater, toxic wastewater that is being produced that has to be stored somewhere. There are links to earthquakes due to fracking operations. There is the issue of you know, building of roads and having all those wells and well pads and having man camps for workers coming in there, which then make it you know, the life unsafer for particularly women in this community. So it's really a super large and quite well researched issue. And also there, I think it's really this racial injustice very high as well when you look at where are these operations being done, and it's also often poorer communities and so on. So it's really highly immoral, and it's one of the most brutal methods to actually extract fossil fuels. Yeah, so it makes sense to ban it. So in this case, European countries are partially clever, but it's highly problematic that they import the gas. And you mentioned Ireland before. Indeed, there is a case on of really having pinpointed fracked gas imports as a problem, and in Ireland there is the government's statement that is reading. As Ireland moves towards carbon neutrality, it does not make sense to develop LNG projects importing fracked gas. So that's quite clear, and that's quite a win. But even there, this win is not permanent. But indeed, it is possible, and it depends a lot on political decisions as well, whether this can be banned. And I fully agree with Jenny, we should not wait for politicians taking their decisions. But it's also, yeah, often there is like, you know, trade rules or market distortion, etc., being claimed for not being able to ban frack gas. But then on the other hand, the Irish example tells us that, yeah, it is a possibility. And it's a high necessity to really look at how we get as fast as possible out of all gas, and really immediately starting with frack gas.
Thanks a lot, Frida, for that overview. And I want to get now more into the work also that a lot of the great work and positive work that people do. So Neville, you said you're also a grassroots community coordinator and campaigner for the Green Connection. So could you tell us more about the work that you do?
Yeah, thank you very much, Anushka, for this question. We have a grassroots campaign called Boost Our Oceans that we are running on the ground because we have seen on the government website that our oceans is actually demarcated into blocks, and those blocks are then hired and rented out to the highest bidder, those multinational companies that are from Europe, most of them, that you know, buy these blocks up, and then they divide our oceans into blocks, and then they do that for offshore oil and gas. And we have a history of gas in this country with a platform that is in a place called Mossel Bay in the southern coast, where they also have a gas, the Brilpada, but they have now also opened that well up to try and look for more oil over there. That is Total, which is or the block called Block 11 and 12B. I don't know if you can maybe zoom in and see this. Is it visible? Not really.
Yeah, if you put it there. Yeah.
Yeah, and they want to drill for more oil and gas in the area, and mostly gas that they want to, and they have gotten a new find, a discovery in that area. So now they want to open that well up. And my experience with working with the community when they came for this well, none of the community was ever informed and invited to a meeting, you know, and Jenny was speaking, and I just realized the similarities in our work that we do in terms of the environmental racism that is mostly on already marginalized fishing groups, that, you know, people that has been a long experienced fisher in this particular area said that was a very, very popular area for fishers from all around the country, especially for king clip in that area. And now there's no more fish, and the marginalized communities, we have small vessels of both. We cannot go to the extent to hunt for fish in greater distance in the oceans. So our fishing grounds that was there is no more. So because of these companies that came to drill for oil, and now recently 2 years ago, we had seen the devastating effect of this infrastructure. Now that the oil refinery is abandoned and it's in the process of shutting down, we see now the infrastructure breaking, and pollution is now coming downstream to the beaches. And the beach was closed for the December holidays. That is a popular holiday where everybody goes to the beach with their families. So they couldn't go to the beach because for the 4 towns next to the ocean, the entire beaches was closed because of the pollution that was there. And this is but no surprise, because there's an oil major company there, and the company that's there is Total, that is now wanting to come back and to do more oil and gas. But we have a very big problem with this same company that has not just that block. Next to that block, that's 11 and 12B. Next to that block is block 5, 6, 7, and that our government has just last November also approved. And just over the mountain on the other side, as we speak right now, there is a seismic boat there doing seismic surveys. While we were in our Christmas holidays, they came in, and all of the organizations were caught napping, and we could not interdict that boat like we did with a shell boat, interdict it out of the waters. We could not. Now it's busy doing seismic surveys in our waters as we speak, and fishermen are furious because of this. And we've already, you know, tried to take steps to do a legal action against Searcher, which is an Australian company, again, that's doing the seismic surveys around the ocean in that part of the West Coast, and next to the West Coast. But there's also more Total blocks. There's blocks 4B, 4B and 3B, and there's next to that, there's block 2B, and there's also block 1. And all of these blocks, interestingly enough, that is why we have this nightmare against this company. There's all this one company called Total Energies that wants to work in this block of area, and area where our fishing communities, like I said, is using small vessels, and they are dependent on a migratory species of fish that comes through on a specific time of the year between early summer and also mid winter. It comes through. So now they've already complained that they came home with empty vessels because not just of climate change. Already climate change is impacting the ocean already. Now on top of that, there's oil and gas extractive activities in the ocean that is also affecting them, and there's a seismic surveys happening as well. This is the type of crazy madness our marginalized communities is faced with. On top of that, you have the government environmental department that keeps on cutting on marginalized fishing basket. So the pressure is just on the communities, and this is so unfair. This is so unjust. It shows that this is a system adopted by the colonialism, now neocolonialism, that still oppresses the marginalized people of this country, not this country, this continent, around the world. Indigenous communities does not have a right to a clean ocean. That is the message that they're sending to us, in essence, that indigenous communities' rights can be violated left, right, and center, and nobody cares about that. And that is why we are trying our level best to stand up against that. Let me go on to our other campaign. Our other campaign is Stop TIPSA. TIPSA is the Total Energy EMP South Africa. That is Total's one of the company, the projects in Block 11 and 12B. Then we also have our Ocean, Our Future campaign as well. And then also we are going to start soon also the green hydrogen lie. Now they've also came onto one of the areas in Block 1 where there's not only the offshore oil and gas, they now come with the green hydrogen as being the solution, but we know it is a false solution. So we want to start the campaign, the green lie, the green lie, not the green hydrogen, the green hydrogen, the green hydrogen. So we want to emphasize that it's a false solution to the communities, because communities already pointed out that this project where they've earmarked this green hydrogen is in a place where it is the fisher folk on the other side, where they will build a railway through the people's land. And people has just recently, after the apartheid and colonialism, have got their land back. Now, again, there's a multinational company or project in the green hydrogen that wants to take the land back. So there's the land that is earmarked for the solar plant, which is a place that flourished during the September month, where the pastoralists send the animals to herd, and this is an important land for them. So now on top of that, they also and this is a water scarce area as well on top of that, because this is close to Namibian border almost, where they want to do this green hydrogen. So this place is a water scarce area on top of it. So they will compete against the water, but they're now also talking about more pressure on the ocean, because they're talking about desalination as well. So that is the thing that we are grappling with, and that's the communities that I'm working with, and is making those type of sounds. The place, lastly, let me just end off with this. The place where they want to build the harbor is called Bogobai, and that place has cultural and indigenous significance in terms of the mountain peak area where indigenous communities live. There was grace and indigenous cultural significance for the indigenous people over there as well. And this is a place that will be destroyed in the process as well. And the divide and rule, already there is a group of the community that is now thinking that this is a savior, a heavenly basket that's dropping from heaven from them. And now there's that divide, and the people that's linked to the land are now wanting to fight and defend the land and the water and their territory as well. So those are the issues that I am grappling with on the ground. And then we connected with some Stop ECOP communities on the Don't Gas Africa level because of this irritation by the same company, Total. We connected with Stop ECOP, and then from there we got the African campaign that also says kick Total out of Africa as well. Let me stop there.
Thank you, Neville. I didn't want to interrupt you, but it was very interesting, yeah, to hear. You do a lot of work, I have to say. But I wanted to highlight one thing you said about the colonialism part, and I think what Don't Gas Africa published on your social media, it summarizes it well, that Africa is not Europe's gas station, basically, and this is what is happening at the moment. Daniel, I also want to ask you about your campaigns. You're leading a campaign called Say No to Gas in Mozambique. So could you tell us more about this and similar job work that you have been doing?
All right, thanks. One of the things that has been really positive is how much solidarity and support we've had. These projects have huge global players, from South Korea, Japan, UK, Netherlands, France, Italy, US. It goes on. We're talking about, if you look at the who's buying, who's funding, who's constructing, it becomes like we're interacting with over 30 companies that are involved in some strong way. And what has been amazing is we've managed to find civil society fighting these companies and linking up with them. And that's the thing. It's this globalizing, like joining the struggles, working together has been really, it's like when you have so much bad news, interacting with these amazing people with amazing struggles and working together really is critical for this. And it allows to each country has something they can do. We've had from very technical aspects right down to legal cases, taking victims of abduction, rape, and military abuse, all the way up to lobbying and trying to end some of these financial barriers, such as these investor-state dispute mechanisms within bilaterals that basically transfer the risk to Mozambique. So there's a lot happening, and that has been one of the things we've learned. It's we need to join forces, and if whatever pressures we can do, delaying is critical, because gas is becoming less and less viable as each year passes. And so any form of delay, any form of pushback, and we've had legal cases in the UK, we're trying now push legal cases in France and Italy. We've taken even we have accused Total of manslaughter in French courts because of the way they during the Palma massacre, they just left and abandoned people and they had responsibilities. So it's just attacking these groups from every angle and any angle that we have, and just causing as many delays and disruption, because gas is dying. We just have to make it die as soon as possible. And so, yeah, that's the thing. It's like linking up with all these struggles. And what was amazing is how similar these struggles are in terms of geography. I was in New Orleans last year, and it is so similar with the fact that you dump all the pollution, all the land grab, the impacts, the loss of livelihoods. But also in time, we're talking right now, Mozambique is going through conflict, corruption, debt, and all that. And these are things that are common in 10 years ago, 30 years, 40 years. And that's another thing, like all these best practices and standards, they're useless. There is no way of doing good gas. And so that's so yeah, our campaign has been very much linking up to all the other movements and campaigns, and all from the ground all the way up to all the international campaigns, and we just have to carry on joining forces. So yeah, just to not take it too long. I know people have been here for a while. Thanks.
Yeah, thanks a lot. Yeah, we are nearing the end with the questions, and I wanted to ask Frida now. I'm glad that Neville mentioned hydrogen, because this is also something we are facing in Europe, but of course it's affecting Africa a lot, since EU wants to import hydrogen from Africa. But yeah, I wanted to ask you, Frida. So we've seen that many countries in Europe are trying to greenwash basically fossil gas projects with hydrogen. And they're trying to do it with this so-called project of list of projects of common interest of the EU, so-called PCI list. And even Croatia tried, but I would say failed in this attempt, at least for this list. But how real is the threat of hydrogen, and why? And we are not really talking here about green hydrogen, are we?
Yeah, thanks. This is a huge fake green Pandora's box. I'll try to keep it short. But indeed, I think it's good that Neville already went and talked about the impacts that this has on the alleged supply countries. We have, I mean, in Congo, the biggest ever built dam they try to justify that with hydrogen and say they need electricity for creating hydrogen. We have threats in Chile, Namibia, like huge renewable energy projects, which are like basically super centralized and again owned by the same companies that that love hydrogen. But yeah, on the same time, we have the European side with indeed the push for building out more and more infrastructure that looks very, very similar to fossil gas infrastructure, with the claim that it's for hydrogen. Over 500 large-scale hydrogen projects are proposed on EU level, and it's interesting how for this PCI list, so for the top EU priority energy projects list, it's 100% of those projects, of the hydrogen projects proposed, come from the fossil gas industry. So the gas transport industry, but also like RWE, Shell, BP. So yeah, it's very, very clear who is behind it. And yeah, the example by Croatia is interesting because Croatia really submitted 10 hydrogen projects for the list. None of this was taken. They didn't even cover the fact that they tried to greenwash fossil gas pipelines. So this was actually also a question that the EU Commission asked Plinacro, which is the gas transport industry in Croatia, and said, wait a minute, you are submitting this pipeline as a hydrogen pipeline to us, but we see that you submitted it elsewhere as a fossil gas pipeline. So make up your mind, what are you actually submitting? So that's a very interesting, I think, case of how this hydrogen washing is being done. In that case, yeah, Croatia did not get any hydrogen PCI or fake hydrogen PCI on the list, but still, yeah, we see that it's really becoming a cash cow for the fossil gas industry to say either we're clean or we still need to build out basically almost the same infrastructure. And indeed, there is, yeah, the poster child is always green hydrogen, which, as we know more and more about, is also entrenching like neo-colonial supply chains and issues. And at the same time, yeah, probably the biggest amount of hydrogen that they secretly are wishing for is fossil-based hydrogen, which is the same as a waste of gas. And if you create hydrogen from fossil gas, emission-wise, it's much worse than just using the gas straight away. So yeah, we're running into a much bigger problem actually, and wasting a lot of money onto this. It's not. I don't want to deny that hydrogen cannot be used anywhere, but this is definitely a very limited amount of niche uses for hydrogen, and definitely not this huge overall unlimited boom that we see today.
Yeah, thanks a lot, Frida, for that overview. And my last question to all of you, whoever wants to answer, you can all answer. Because an important aim of this event and all the connections that we're making so far is also to see how can we better support each other and strengthen our local and international struggles. So how do you think we in Europe, especially those countries that are importing LNG from your countries, could support you? And what could be the most effective way in your opinion? Or if you see some things that are lacking, you can also comment on that. What can be improved?
I mean, I can start just very briefly. I mean, I'm seeing Jenny here. I met Jenny in Europe last time, and I saw that whenever people from the United States that really see and tell see with their own eyes and live with their own experience what this LNG boom does in the United States, when they meet decision makers, that has quite a long lasting impact. And also for me personally, I really feel much more what I'm advocating against now. So I'm really grateful for that connection, and I'm also, it's really helpful for me to just be in touch, and so we're much quicker in detecting very obvious lies that are being told about Europeans really needing this huge LNG expansion. Just to mention the example of LNG, but then for hydrogen, of course, or these patterns that we see, that pushes for full solutions seem to be quite similar everywhere. So yeah, I think that's also strengthening to know that we're against like a machinery which is working quite similarly wherever in the globe it is.
Thank you, Frida.
Yeah, I can kind of hop on next. I think for us in Corpus, being a small city, despite how large and important our port actually is in the grand scheme of things, and our position globally with regard to fossil fuels is actually incredibly important. But actually living here and the size of it, it's really easy to feel disconnected, and this sense of like organized and intentional abandonment of our region. I know we've like called it a sacrifice zone several times, and like that feeling when you live here is incredibly palpable. And so I think a lot of the work we do is just connecting communities, even within our own community, who otherwise wouldn't be connected. So there's like indigenous peoples of the coastal bend, which join this fight for all of the obvious reasons, because we're on stolen Karankawa land. And these facilities are built on their ancestors, where, tons of like native remains and artifacts have already been found. And like the Hillcrest Residents Association, which is, this historically Black community, and like Ingleside on the Bay Coastal Watch, which is a predominantly white and relatively wealthier region that initially got involved in these fights because of the impact of like LNG tankers on their property and their homes, right? Which is like a different concern, but also important. So like these communities that otherwise wouldn't necessarily have been brought together other than through this struggle. And then beyond that, like outside of, the Coastal Bend region, like the first time I went to Brazoria County, which is where Freeport LNG is, for instance, I was like really struck by how much it looked like my home. And like the story of the attempted destruction of the East End there is so similar to what our story is with regard to Hillcrest. And I think that's similar in terms of like when I went to Wilhelmshaven in Germany, where there's a floating terminal, I was blown away by like how similar it is there to our home, like not just in appearance, but in terms of the stories of the locals there, right? And so I think, one of the biggest things we can do is share our stories, and really like bring that human aspect into what it is we're doing. And so just to have and know that there are other people everywhere who are experiencing the same devastation, and be able to like see a common kinship in one another is incredibly valuable to us here when we feel so isolated and so abandoned by the people who run our country, by the people who run our state, by the people who run our city, and these regulatory bodies. Because we that sense of abandonment and disregard and neglect and harm when we're not being neglected is incredibly real. So to feel solidarity outside of and with complete disregard for borders and how fake they are is like really, really meaningful, and does really push our work forward. And I think a lot of times we're so like brought down by the drudgery of like our day-to-day lives and fighting back, that it's really hard to think in the future about what we could be demanding. And so I think increasingly like we have to think of like what we ask if and when we win. Like so much of our day is like spent on the really nitty-gritty, unsexy work of like training people to do public comment and permitting processes, which is all like very valuable and important. But I think that we have to look forward. So we have to begin, especially with like fossil fuel like finance work, think about what do climate reparations look like in these regions that are being impacted? What does a just transition actually in practical and not just in sloganeering look like? What does that mean for working class people who have been essentially like poverty drafted into these industries because there are no job opportunities, or so few job opportunities for Black and Brown, Indigenous, and working class communities? What does that look like? And so I think those opportunities existing in terms of like building international solidarity are much more meaningful than when we are hyper focused on what's happening in our own communities. No matter how much I love my community, my heart is there, and that work is so valuable to me. I think the opportunity we're presented with in terms of doing this work and building international solidarity and allyship just means the world to us. So more of this, in short.
Thanks a lot, Jenny, for that input. And Neville and Daniel, if you also want to jump in. I'm just aware of the time, so if you could.
Yeah, let me jump in real quick. So yeah, I really I think when we connect on not just continental level but also on global level, it is quite crucial for us to share ideas, to share strategies, to share information, to share data. I would love to get involved with Jenny, because actually how I got involved in all of this, our area in South Africa was earmarked for fracking. And that's how I started with all this environmental. I was just, assisting a relative of mine with farming business. And then we heard, as the farmers, this threat is coming into our land. And that's how I became vocal about this and stood up. So that reality is there. So if we can share ideas, because we also saw videos about people's water being on fire, and our land is also a water scarce area, and that raises a whole lot of alarms for us and the animals that we eat in the area that we live. So that was a big eye-opener for me. That's how I got involved in environmental justice issues. Also, if we can connect more with also, for example, Daniel, I would love to share ideas and those points on similarities of how we can challenge Total even here with what's happening over there, the violations, human rights violations, and the land dispossession that's happening over there, how we can challenge them over here as well, because it's the very same company that is doing this and then on an annual basis brag about its super profits, and it needs to be held accountable, not just on the African continent, but also on the globe. Yes, we also know about the court case that is happening in France. We might be going, sending an African delegation there later this year as well to go and support, and also bring our voices once again up there and go to the Total headquarters and parliament or legislation and go and complain about this company that is doing this violation and dispossession of land and violating people's livelihoods and destroying our land, and a climate killer, that it is, so that is what we want to do. So it is good that we connect on this level and share ideas and share solidarity and encourage one another that we are not alone. Our struggles is the same. So we need to stand up and share strategies and share information and data as much as we can, and build this revolution and stand up again to overthrow this mad, hungry, capitalist, greed, profit system that we are currently having here. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Neville. And maybe after the event, you can share with me the information about the court case, and perhaps we could think of solidarity actions in Europe, but also in other parts when this will be happening at the same time. And Daniel, if you want to also say.
I think our previous speakers said everything. We just have to be united. And Neville, Dipti actually spoke amazing stuff that you've been doing. So the office knows a lot of the work, and we respect and admire a lot of the work you've been doing. And we also close with Groundwork and South Durban, and we're working with them. So definitely, the more we can work together, the happier we'd be as well. But it just we have to unite. But it's narratives. We need just to just spread the truth, and just and we have to start with the mind. Sometimes we're focusing on actions, but sometimes not everybody can act. Some people are far away, also. So it's there's a lot of lies spreading around, and there's a lot of false narratives, and we just have to really break them down, debunk them, and clear the path for what we need to do. So, but everybody before us said it so well that I think I'm covered. Thank you.
Thanks a lot. And I'm really glad that we're also interconnecting within the panel and already thinking of joint actions. So yeah, now I want to open the virtual floor to our participants. If we can take maybe 15 minutes. If anyone has any questions or comments, and please just say if you're going to speak in English or Croatian so our interpreter can know. You can raise, there is a hand or make a sign in the chat, however you wish. Nobody? It was also clear and insightful that you got all the things you wanted. Okay, I mean, if there are no questions or anything. Oh, yeah, Edwin, go. You're muted.
Okay, do you hear me?
Yeah.
Great. Just yesterday there was a documentary on Croatian television. I didn't watch it, but I saw an announcement about the abandoned fossil fuel infrastructure and how it's still leaking, for example, methane in connection to gas. And I always wonder what will happen in the future with all this infrastructure. We have in Croatia infrastructure from 30, 40 years ago, for example, from Yugoslavia period, some kind of factories or whatever that are still big environmental problem. So if we all know that like we have to do this transition and we are still building the fossil fuel infrastructure beside what is doing right now to everyone, it will just be left there for like centuries to come. So I'm just saying that we already have proved that the companies are not willing to take care of their leftovers, as we have here in Croatia the gas station under the sea for last like 3 years or something. So this is just another problem that I would like to like target in our campaigns maybe. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you for bringing that up. And Edwin is a very active activist in many organizations and collectives here in Zagreb, just to know. Yeah, I mean, we brought up, I think, several times the issue of stranded assets. So maybe if anyone here wants to comment on this, what Edwin said.
I'm happy to just very briefly hop in. Yeah, this is something that nobody talks about, that pipelines, I mean, if you build them, they are around they can last for 80 years or so. And I think hydrogen is as well coming in there as this false solution, or where, you know, it's being claimed that we can quite easily and should repurpose, basically slightly change fossil gas pipelines so hydrogen can be transported in there. Which is basically trying to avoid this whole question of stranded assets, while continuing that, you know, to make sure that the money flows into this build out. Yeah, so there we have lots of unanswered questions, although the fossil gas industry is quite enthusiastic about that. And yeah, on the issue of methane leaks, and I was quite impressed by the example also that Neville gave about this closed mine which contaminated the beach. We know that as well for fracking wells, no? they're I mean, after they're being used, a part of already all the very, very high methane emissions that they make, like closing those wells, firstly, it's often not done properly, and even if you do it as properly as possible, those wells are leaking more and more and more over time. So it's just a matter of time before this is leaking again. And I mean, we have had quite some advancements with those methane cameras being more and more common that can actually see that. But yeah, I think particularly with fracking, but yeah, basically with the transport and storage and use of gas in general. I mean, up to the gas stove, there is more and more research as well coming out with the methane leaks in our homes when we cook dinner, and children having asthma issues with it because of that. Yeah, from the beginning to the end, there are emissions. But yeah, definitely needing to hammer home the real issues around that infrastructure and how long it lasts.
Thank you, Frida. And Neville?
Yeah, if I can just add, the other concern is the fact that many of the coal, we have an example of the coal, the mining industry, the fossil fuel industry does not have respect for human life. There is a coal mine that is abandoned, that was coming from the 80s already, and now it is abandoned. But the land is still burning. There's an environmental group that does toxic tours around that area, and there's a community living next to that coal plant, and they need to detour, and a lot of children and even animals has gone missing. And there's a furnace of fire that is burning there in Witbank in South Africa, which is one of the most polluted areas of the coal plant. It shows that these industries are not responsible. They leave their mess for generations. It is already more than 20 years that mine or has been abandoned, but the earth is still burning down there, and nobody wants to take responsibility. The profit has been made, the people has escaped, the government does not hold them accountable, and nobody owns up to the responsibility, and the community has to sit with it, and the planet is burning, and it's literally burning there. When you walk there, you will see some smoke coming on different patches on the field when you come near to that toxic toll that the one of our activists usually takes us through there. And that is the danger. This fossil fuel companies does not have respect for human life and the environment. And this is what we have seen. And this should be part and parcel. We cannot isolate them anymore, that the gas industry will do it any better. They will just, do the same as Edwin has said. They need to be held responsible like this. And like I said, even in the gas, we've seen also the same examples.
Thanks a lot for that input. Does anyone else have any questions? You can raise your hand or maybe write in the chat. If not, if any one of you guys, our guests, have any final words you want to say, or I think actually most of you ended with very great conclusions, especially on how we could interconnect more, and how actually these already connections are very valuable to us and make us feel less alone in our struggles. Yeah, thank you, Jenny. Thanks a lot. And really special thanks to Frida, Jenny, Edwin, Neville, and Danny for participating on for us on a Friday night, and you guys who joined. And I think these are very valuable spaces, and I think we need to open them more and talk more to each other, and talk more about what actually real solidarity in practice means. and to understand each other's struggles better. And because I feel this is the only way that we can actually build a stronger movement and fight for a more just society, and in the end a livable future, not so very distant, I would say. So yeah, thanks everyone, and we are in touch. And like I said, we can see maybe around that Total trial, if at least on a European level, we can do something in solidarity with our comrades in Mozambique and South Africa. So yeah, thank you.
Thanks to you.
Thanks so much, y'all.
Thank you,
Have
comrades.
a nice evening and morning,
Nice
Jenny.
evening. Goodbye.
Thank